And these impressions in the mind are not enlightenment experiences. They're impressions in the mind. So, I had a person who had it so deep one time in enlightenment intensive that when first asked who he was, he pulled out his driver's license and showed it to his partner. Well, at least he showed it to his partner. But this is who he was. This was his identity. He was that printing on his driver's license. People have identified themselves not only with ideas in the mind, but personality traits in the mind. In other words, they're a nice guy. Or they're a no good. Or they're, well, I'm just kind of a guy. So there are these various personality traits that they identify themselves with. They are not those things, in fact. But just like an actor playing a role has forgotten who he was, these people have become identified with personality traits which are contained in the mind and have forgotten that they are playing a role or a personality. No. Worse than that, they get a vested interest in certain states of being. They have a reputation. Or they're trying, even more basically, to tell people something by being a certain way. Say they want to get loved. And that's a pretty common trait. They want to be loved. And so they be a certain way in order to invite that love. Aggressive or passive or neutral, it doesn't matter. The mind can figure out any justification. For by being a certain way, they're going to get what they want. They feel. So not only have they become unconsciously identified with something, but they often have a value, a vested interest, a use for being a certain way, and thinking of themselves as that. And all of this masks who they actually are. It interferes with the process of contemplation, and all this stuff is stored in the mind. Our job, should we decide to accept it, is to help them to de-identify, give up their investment, dissolve away or separate out the mind from themselves, so at last they can directly experience who they are. Now, in the classical techniques, I don't know if that's an accurate statement anymore because this has almost become a classic. We better give it another 100 years. In the classical techniques, of just contemplating, the aspirant gradually burned out the mind. How is the mind burned? Well, if you stared at a rock long enough, it'll dissolve away. But it'd take a long time of staring. Like 400 billion years or something like that. It's like breathing on a rock. Gradually would wear it out by erosion, wind erosion. Running water over a rock makes it go a little faster. Taking a hammer out and smashing it, pouring chemicals on it, might dissolve it away in minutes. So there are different rates in which you can take care of these things in the mind, and different rates in which you can dissolve away these identifications, these confusions, these traumas, and these vested interests that are contained in the mind, and make it stick and hold on. The most powerful means of dissolving it is through communication. Because, as I said earlier, the mind is suspension of non-communications, attempted, but non-communications between individuals. Somebody is trying to have themselves understood. I want myself accepted. I want to be loved. I want to be approved. And nobody will accept me. Nobody will take my outbasket. So, with this observation of this principle, what I did was have people first contemplate who they were, and then communicate to their partner, to someone that would be their partner they're working with, what occurs in their mind as a result of that contemplation, so that when it is communicated, and to the degree that it is received and understood, those things dissolve and vanish out of the mind. That is the crux of the principle. That is the crux of the power of this technique. I've tested this technique extensively, and I've compared it to other methods of enlightenment. And depending upon the skill of the master, the experience of the participants, and the length of time of the Enlightenment Intensive, the technique is about 50 to 100 times more rapid in producing enlightenment experiences than the classical techniques. Now you should try to understand the mechanism by which this technique works. If you don't, you'll not ever really be able to understand why I've set up the format the way it is. You'll just think it's just some arbitrary thing that Yogeshwar has thought up, and therefore you'll vary it and change it, and then you'll teach the people that you teach later on how to do enlightenment intensives in ways that are based just upon things that you personally favor, and not based upon these fundamental observations of the mechanics of life. So you bother yourselves to understand this, and then you'll see the why the enlightenment technique is structured the way it is. Otherwise, you'll start changing it. And you will change it to something else. And then you'll decide, well, it's not such a good technique after all. Maybe we better change what we're trying to do with it. Instead of trying to get people enlightened, what we should do is try to make them feel better. Or try to get them on a high. Try to get them to have some sort of a elevated experience. Or try to get them to get off on the contact between each other. Or try to get them to straighten out their relationships. Now these are all noble and useful ends, no doubt. But they don't lead to enlightenment. Now if you want to work on getting people enlightened, you should understand how this technique works. Then if you understand how it works, then you will not be tempted into the 1,000,001 possible variations that could be used instead of this technique. I've trained some people in the past in doing Mastery Enlightenment intensives, and many of them have varied the technique, and the reason why they varied is because they have not understood the mechanism on which the technique is based. Now you should listen closely.